Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at a question from Ken Roth from Human Rights Watch in a recent interview with Alex Karp. It's really cool because he's literally asking the question that is on my mind, which is how do consumers protect and own their data? And he even gets into the question of this sort of merger between the use of data for government and the use of data in commerce, and how those worlds are coming together. And Alex Karp is going to agree with him. He's not disagreeing with the usages. What's interesting is that Alex Karp is going to conclude that the technical complexity in allowing users to own their own data with proper controls is extremely hard. But luckily, Palantir wrote the book on data privacy, quite literally. Check out Courtney Bowman. He's written some great work on this. But let's get into the question. Let's analyze the first part of it, and then we're going to break it down from there.
Excuse me. All right.
Ken Roth.
I'm Ken Roth from Human Rights Watch.
I know. Everyone knows who you are.
I wanted to kind of go back to basics in terms of not data protection, but who owns the data to begin with. And I mean, go at this philosophically because you've been speaking philosophically. The U.S., in my impression, kind of got off on the wrong foot from like the troglodyte era. I mean, I used to be a prosecutor in a former life, and I was
Former life.
Okay.
That's a unique interpretation of what you do for a living.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough. I used to. There was something called pen registers in the old days, which said that I could just without any warrant get the phone numbers that somebody dialed. I couldn't I couldn't listen to the phone conversation without a warrant, but I could get the numbers they dialed because the dialers shared the number with the phone company. That was the rationale. Therefore, there was no right to privacy. And that, old-fashioned exception where, the FBI agent would have to follow up one by one on each call, and so there was actually a practical limit to how much your privacy could be invaded, has just been, a massive hole blown through it because this can all be done automatically with computers, and this data, which is all shared with the internet company, can completely reconstruct your life. And in fact, that's sort of the basis of what surveillance capitalism is right now. It's the basis of your company, that you collect all this data.
It's not the basis of my company. That part's wrong.
Okay, fair enough. Right. Okay, fair enough. So my question really is, do we need to kind of reconceptualize practically what the right to privacy means in this modern world where and no longer consider this data shared just because I happen to punch in something into a search engine or visit a website. Should I genuinely own my data? Not in a kind of, only if I can figure out at the bottom of all the waivers is the right thing to check, but just presumptively it's my data unless I very consciously give it to your company or some other company.
There's a lot. I agree with the gist of the question, and with great respect to the question, which I think, and what you're intending to ask, it's not asked precisely enough to give you the right answer. So let me reformulate the question so that you get a technical version. So you're putting a couple things together, which is what is exactly right philosophically. There's been a move from what I would call a nodal society to a network society, where when the FBI or whatever authorities were getting the access to phone numbers, that was ethically somehow understandable, leaving the law aside, because in fact they were getting access to the numbers, they weren't getting access to you. When you move to a network society, in fact, the network of your behaviors is actually you. Like you can know more about the network than the person knows about themselves, so node to network. And this happened where you are right technically is that insight does power the way in which you do certain security. So for example, if you in cyber, if you want to know who's going where is the data, who's robbing you, that you look at the network, you don't look at the node. You figure out the node by looking at the network. You're then imposing that onto software companies in general, and that's where it goes a little wrong. And so, for example, you're taking consumer and enterprise and putting them into one bucket. where in fact, and merging distinctions that are different in America and in Europe. So in Europe, you would be protected in consumer and government interactions equal. So you have data protection as a consumer and as a in your interaction with government somewhat equally. It's not the same, obviously. If you are involved in criminal behavior, they can see the data, and you're using the ownership to. By the way, I happen to agree with you on that. Like, but it's a very subtle thing in the consumer space since you've signed up to give it to a consumer. I happen to think one of the reasons why we've been very critical of consumers, they de facto are making you into a product. They're monetizing your data, and then you're getting nothing. And in fact, they do know more about you than you know about yourself. And they're not only that, they're influencing who you are, which is has enormous political problems for democracies, which in my view, you see on extremes left and right. You might just think on the right. I think in both.
So Alex Karp is agreeing with Ken Roth that there was a phase transition where he essentially went from these something as simple as tracing phone numbers to now this gigantic social graph, this insane amount of data that connects you to everything you interact with and everything you do. It's literally a digital twin of you. He is agreeing on that. But he's also saying, look, this isn't every software company. We need to separate both consumer and enterprise, and also Europe from America. In America, there are different rules governing this, and it's a little bit strange because you are actually agreeing to it, whereas in Europe, there's GDPR protections and other legislation that do protect consumers on some level. But I think it's really good that he points out that with these consumer media applications, you are the product. And you are right that this is very scary that governments can use this information where these social media companies know more about you than you know about yourself, and they can influence your behavior. That should scare the shit out of everyone.
But but and then you're imposing that onto what we do as a completely separate thing because, in fact, in enterprise there are various things, but in general in enterprise, like in my case, we don't own the data, we don't collect the data, we don't keep the data, we do process the data. So now you could say a version of being critical if you accepted that architecture, which would be even a harder question, is yeah, but you don't have to own the data if in fact your interaction with the data is so powerful that you get to the same place. Now, there you're doing an immoral distinction on top of a legal distinction. You can argue that. I can't tend to think that you need to look at both, but in Europe and in European law, there's a difference between the data owner and the data processor. And this is a big distinction. Just like in American law, there's a distinction between access to the data and moving the data. You could call it academic, and we could litigate that, and I'm not on either side, but that's just the way it is, and I think both make sense. Both have huge weaknesses. What you're getting at, though, are two things I broadly very much agree with. Yes, what I don't know if you can call it data ownership when you get to an anti-terror legal context where you have certain rights to get access to the data, but there should be a great deal of skepticism and rigor about what you're doing with the data, even when you, to use your model, move from I own the data to I have a warrant. The police have a warrant, can look at it, precisely because of the assumption of your question, which is that in pen testing, pen actual looking at these numbers, it's not super powerful. Whereas when the police get your, or the surveillance state gets your, they actually can have insights into your movement, your data, your personal life. Is it really necessary for the government to know, who you actually see and what you're doing with them? Unless you're like some severe criminal. And then where I would say.
So Alex Karp went beyond Ken Roth's question and reframed it and saying, look, it's not, the data ownership is a legal question. If your interaction with the data is so powerful, you essentially get to the same place, that's a harder question. And I think he's hinting like that's actually where we're at today, right? So we don't need the ownership of the data. Our ability to process it is so powerful. We get to the exact same place as these social media companies, but we largely do it in the counterterrorism space where it belongs. He's also saying, look, there is massive misuse for this kind of a system, whether you're dealing with just the social media data or whether you're dealing with, the actual systems that can process it. Hence, we need oversight. We need controls. I think that's really what he's hinting at, is that, look, the bad actors in political systems could use this data, use this information and the ability to process it all to do some seriously bad shit to people. And, letting government actors who, may not have the best intentions, like, look, do police really need all this information about you? Probably not. Let's save that for the counterterrorism space.
Much on the advocacy side of this would be, if I were a personal person, people outside the company don't always believe me, people inside the company know this is true, is, well, you're saying basically to people, trust me. But no one trusts large industry or government, certainly not in America. Actually, in Europe, it's different. People trust. But in any case, then you get to the verification. So when you move to this, the distinctions. The primary distinction, in my view, is under what circumstances would broader society believe it's okay to move to hyper powerful techniques. So I would say most people in society are okay with warrant-based hyperpower techniques against terror suspects, and most people do not want this against normal criminals, meaning you're stealing a piece of bread, or there being a slippage. So like, what happens when they're still running this program? I mean, this is the classic migration thing. It starts with the terrorist, and all of a sudden it's the political. And so that's again where I would say, the way this works is people like you and me, who would broadly probably disagree on a lot of issues, I assume, we might agree quite a bit on how you actually get these things to work technically. And if we agreed and we were like, I trust that third party to enforce our agreement, you might find the world is a lot better place. Because in fact, technically, and by the way, you could say, well, is this guy just mad? I would tell you it's commercially in my interest because I know we can do this. And I know, and the one thing I would say that typically advocates, which I respect on your end, should often underestimate is how technically difficult it is to do what is ethically correct. What you're describing, honestly, I don't know any other company that can do that. It's part of the reasons why I advocate for it. But it's very, 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 and what I would call it is a distinction between is a broad imposition onto data of an ownership category, where the rebuttable presumption, to use a legal term, is that you own the data. And to take switch the rebuttable presumption, you need a high standard of scrutiny that always gets scrutinized. I kind of suspect you and I agree on that. Okay, so now that has to be enforced. And then there you need technical specificity, and you need an enforcement engine. And that, by the way, is going to have to be done in the West globally, with some modification. There are real differences in how America, Germany, England see this. But the commonality is what you outlined, and that can be achieved.
Technical specificity and an enforcement engine. By technical specificity, Karp means security protocols that ensure data is not misused. And that's built into the system. And I can tell you right now, Palantir has some of the most sophisticated protocols in place anywhere developed ever. And that's why he's so confident and welcomes this type of regulation, and why he would agree with Ken Roth on most of this issue. And he's not wrong that this is incredibly hard to do. And there is a need for oversight here. Get a neutral third party to verify we are doing what we are supposed to do, to enforce the agreement, to enforce the technical specificity and validate it's in place. I love this company, man. The more I learn about Alex Karp, the more I learn about this company, I just love it. And I'm hyper confident that Palantir is going to meet the challenges of this decade.